The rooster's nervous clucking echoed through the dining room stillness. Liora Voss was the first to break the heavy silence. His voice was gruff, strained, as if he was forcing himself to speak against some quiet part of him that still grieved for his dead daughter. We've had enough. Every night something shifts. Pictures fall off walls. The water pipes rattle so loud none of us can sleep. Whatever is left of Liora here is hurting this family. Go through with it. Destroy her. My form flared with a cold, sharp shock. I drifted backward, drifting through the hard wooden back of a dining room chair, helpless to pull away from his words. None of those small household disturbances had been my doing. I had no power to hurl framed photos or shake plumbing pipe. I was only capable of faint, almost useless tugs on loose paper, soft, breath-like breezes that no one would ever connect to me. All those strange occurrences had become proof of my malice, built from old houseware and tear and their own tangled, unprocessed grief. Elena nodded beside him, wiping streaming tears from her cheek. Her grief felt genuine, yet it was twisted into something cruel. She mourned the daughter she had lost, but feared the ghost they had invented far more. I can't keep living like this, she whispered. Every corner of this house feels haunted by her anger. We have to end. Only Maeve stayed quiet. Her gaze stayed fixed on the scuffed floorboard, her arms wrapped tight around her own torso. She would not meet Rhys's eyes, would not look toward the empty space where I. She said neither yes nor no. Her silence hung thick in the room, a small flicker of uncertainty amid my parents' firm debate. Rhys studied each of them, and he did not reach for a talisman or move toward the altar. Instead, he folded his arms across his chest, his expression thoughtful rather than eager to begin. You are certain this is vengeance you are said. Not quite a question. Many households call for this kind of work, when what they are really carrying is unresolved. A ghost does not equal a vengeful ghost. Garrett's jaw tightened further. We did not bring you here to give us the. We paid you to perform the ritual. Do what we hired for. Irritation edged into his tone. Money had bought Rhys's service in their view, and they expected blind obedience. I could sense Rhys pushing back internally, weighing his professional obligations against his own. He could turn them down, but if he went away, they would simply find another practitioner, one far less troubled by the moral weight of obliterate. That reality hung unspoken in the air. Rhys gave a slow I will not tonight. The hour is too late, and rites of this gravity demand full clarity of mind for everyone involved. I will stay in the West guest room overnight. Tomorrow morning, we revisit this. If your resolve holds after a full night's rest, proceed. My parents protested immediately. Elena's voice cracked with fear, arguing that every passing night left them exposed to my supposed wrath. Garrett pushed for the ritual to commence then and there, but Rhys stood firm. The contract gave him some latitude over timing, exercised it. He began gathering up of the altar, carefully stacking talismans and setting aside bowls of sticky rice, leaving the caged rooster in the. Reluctantly, defeated and on edge, they dispersed separate bedrooms. The dining room candles were snuffed one by one, plunging the. I lingered alone in the dark dining room. Had not lifted. It had only been delayed by a handful of hours. Rhys's day bought me time, but it was borrowed time. If my parents woke tomorrow unchanged, I would face annihilation at sunrise. Somewhere down the hall, I heard the faint sound of Maeve crying behind a closed bedroom door. A quiet, unread journal sat on the edge of the bookshelf in my old bedroom upstairs. If only someone would open it. If only someone would read the truth of who I really had been. The cold, heavy hush of the old family house clung to every surface. I existed only as something thin and unmoored, drifting through rooms I had once occupied while alive. Death had not brought peace. Instead, I was trapped here, bound to these walls by grief and blame my own family had woven around me. They believed I was a vengeful spirit, returned from beyond the grave to punish them for every misfortune that had fallen over their household since I died. They had hired a man to erase me entirely, to shatter my soul, so there would be nothing left of Liora Voss at all. Rhys Kaleen moved across the dining room floor with quiet, deliberate movements. The wooden table had been cleared of its usual dishes, transformed into a ritual altar. He laid out sticky rice in neat, scattered piles across its surface, set a nervous, squawking rooster inside a narrow wicker cage off to one side, and pinned crumpled paper talismans along each table edge. Candle flame flickered, casting long, wavering shadows over the faces of my mother, father, and younger sister. They stood shoulder to shoulder, rigid with a mixture of fear and sorrow. None of them could see me, even though I hovered barely 3 feet away, my intangible form brushing against my mother's shoulder without so much as a shiver passing through her. I watched every detail in frozen horror. This was not an exorcism to cast me out of the house. This was a rite built for destruction, If the ritual went forward as planned, there would be no lingering ghost, no faint echo of my memory. Everything I had ever been would dissolve into nothing. No afterlife, no rest, just total, permanent annihilation. My chest ached, though I no longer had lungs to draw breath. I thought of all the years I had lived under this roof, the quiet hurts I had carried, the moments I had begged for my family simply to understand me. Now they stood ready to unmake my very existence. Rhys paused his preparation. His dark eyes swept over the three people who had called me their daughter and his voice was unwrapped, cutting softly through the faint cluck of the confined room. Before we begin, I need absolute clarity from all of you. Are you truly set on shattering her soul? Once this ritual commences, there is no turning back. There will be no trace of her left. Not here, not... A thick silence descended over the room. The candle uttered. I hung there, invisible, trembling in the only way a spirit trembles. Every fragment of my being leaned in, desperate to hear that. Some small, foolish part of me still clung to hope. Maybe they would hesitate. Maybe the love we once shared would outweigh terror. Maybe they would refuse to give the command that... My father Garrett shifted his weight. My mother Elena's hands twisted together in her body, tears glistening along. My little sister Maeve stared down the floor, her shoulder clenched, and said nothing at all. They had spent weeks convincing themselves that every creaking pipe, every misplaced trinket around this house was proof of my vengeful rage. They had talked themselves into believing the world would be safer without my ghost waited, patient, not rushing them toward the irreversible. The rooster stirred in its cage, letting out another sharp, anxious cry. The candlelight painted harsh lines across their faces. I could feel the weight of the moment down. Whatever reply they gave would seal my fate. One word from them, and everything I was could vanish forever. Darkness draped over the two-story house. Floorboards creaked under the weight of sleeping house silence. I drifted up the stairwell, floating through closed wooden doors without friction, bound to every corner of this home that had shaped my whole life. Panic hummed inside my incorporeal form. The clock was ticking. Sunrise would bring Rhys back to the altar, and unless something shifted, my existence would be erased completely. I moved into my old bedroom. The room had hardly been touched since my death. My books still lined the shelves, my worn hoodie draped over the foot of the bed, and the leather-bound journal lay undisturbed atop my nightstand. That journal held every quiet hurt I had never spoken aloud. The way my parents always overlooked my feelings, how they prioritized Maeve's wants above my own, the slow, heavy loneliness that had settled over me year after year. If someone would only read those pages, they might finally understand I had never hated them. But no one dared step foot inside this room. They feared my ghost lingered here, feeding on old anger. I stretched every shred of my ghostly power toward the journal. I focused all my fading energy on the paper cover, trying to nudge it open, to flip even a single page. A faint cold breeze stirred across the nightstand. The journal trembled, its cover lifting barely a fraction of an inch, and then fell shut again. My strength spun. I could not muster enough force. Tears would have streamed down my face if I still possessed a physical body. All I could manage was a faint, easily mistaken for drafty old house. Down the hallway, floorboards. Rhys moved through the upstairs. He carried a small brass lantern, its soft golden glow cutting through. He had not gone to the guest room to sleep. Instead, he wandered the second floor halls, investigating the spaces where the family claimed my vengeful spirit roamed. He moved slowly, listening, observing, his lantern sweeping across door frames and walls. He paused outside my bedroom. I hovered close to the wooden barrier, my non-existent heart. Could he sense me on the other side? Would he walk aside? He rested one palm flat against the... I know you in there, he said, voice low, pitched only for the... I do not come to hurt yet. But if you have something me, give me something I can hold on to. Faint cold air will not be enough to overturn a family. His words hung in the stillness. Hope flared inside me. Someone could hear fashion. Not my family, but the man hired to destroy me. I poured every last ounce of my dwindling power against the door handle. The metal knob rattled, shaking sharply once. Rhys flickered. His head tilted, registering the small sign. Before he could turn the handle and put me inside, my mother's bedroom door swung open full. Elena stood in the doorway wrapped in a thin robe, her face pale, alarmed. The noise. Stop, called out to Rhys. Do not go in that room. That is where its anger lives. You are tempted to lash out. Rhys pulled his hand away from my door. He glanced toward Elena. The opening was gone. My chance to show him the way. Elena hurried down the hallway toward him. Fear every word. She pressed him to my bedroom door, to place protective talismans across its frame. Reluctantly, Rhys yielded urgent demands. He pulled folded paper charms from his coat pocket and tacked the doorway. The second the last talisman was secured, a faint invisible barrier settled over the entrance. I could feel it. I was trapped inside my own bedroom. I could drift through walls elsewhere in the house, but this threshold was sealed shut. I could not out into the hallway. I was locked in my own unread journal, from reaching Rhys, cut off from reaching the house. Rhys walked away with Elena, the lamp down the hall. Footsteps retreated. The up quiet once more. I drifted aimless around my small bedroom, hemmed in by the magic on the door. Outside the night sky paled. Dawn was drawing near. Time was running out, and I had just been walled away from my only chance at survival. Dawn seeped through my bedroom window in muted gray streaks. The talismans tacked across my door hummed with a quiet, oppressive weight. I could drift through the plaster walls of the room itself, yet whenever I neared the doorframe, an invisible sharp push threw me backward. The barrier held fast. I was caged within the four walls where I had spent so much of my youth. Left with nothing but time, fragments of memory began to surface unbidden. I relived pieces of my old life, moments I rarely allowed myself to revisit. I saw holiday dinners where Maeve's disappointments always took priority over mine. I remembered the night I'd broken down and told my parents how lonely I felt, only for them to brush off my pain as teenage moodiness. They had loved me, in their own narrow way, but they had never truly seen me. That old hurt lingered, sharp even in death. I had spent years hoping they would understand, and now they wanted to erase me entirely. Downstairs, voices drifted upward. The household had woken. I could not step through the door, but the thin bedroom walls let sound travel. I hovered close to the plaster, drinking in every word spoken in the kitchen below. Rhys was there, talking with my parents, and Maeve sat silent in the background. My mother described more supposed acts of my ghostly rage, embellishing small household nuisances into deliberate acts of malice. My father backed every word she said. From where I was trapped, I heard Rhys press them for specific. He asked for dates, for exact times these haunting events had unfolded. He pushed for concrete details instead of vague, fearful accusations. The family stumbled over their answers. Some stories shifted when he pressed for clarification. Others could not be pinned down to any real timeline. At one point, Maeve spoke up, her voice small and hesitant. Some of those things happened before Liora died. The pipes always rattled. The old pictures on the wall were always... A heavy silence crashed over the kitchen. I held my breath, spirit form thrumming. For a heartbeat, I dared to hope my sister would lay all the truth out into the open. But Elena cut her off. That is irrelevant, my mother replied, her tone tight with urgency. Everything got far worse after she asked. You know, Maeve, do not confuse. Maeve shrank back immediately. I heard the scrape of a chair as she pulled away. She did not argue. She clamped her mouth shut, cowed by our muck. My brief spark of doubt. I had missed courage. She doubt, yes. But she was too afraid to stand against. She would not risk fracturing the rest of the family for a sister who was gone. Rhys had heard Maeve's quiet. Her words planted another seed in his mind. He pushed my parents my history, asking about my mental state while I was alive, about fights, about old. Garrett and Elena painted me as bitter, withdrawn, full of unspoken anger. They omitted every instance of their own neglect. They painted a whited portrait, mixing half-truths with... Rhys did not call them, but I could hear the risks. He knew they were withholding peace. Later that morning, Rhys came upstairs. He stopped outside my sealed door. I floated as close to the barrier as I dared him. He did not try down the charms. My parents were watching him from the bottom of the staircase. He could not openly, not yet. Liora, he said, low enough that only the wolves and I could catch it. I snaps in their story, but I cannot break barrier for you, not while they are watching. You need to find another way to give me proof, something that does not require you to threshold. Footsteps echoed on the stairwell. My father was coming up. Rhys fell silent at once, moved away from my door. The moment was over. I drifted back toward my nightstand, toward the leather journal locked in with me. The journal held everything, but I was trapped behind magic. I could not hand it to him. I could not push through the solid wood door. Outside my window, daylight brightened. The hour for the ritual drew steadily nearer. Only ally could sense me, but he could not get to the evidence that would save me. The afternoon light filtered through my bedroom window in dull golden streaks. I hovered above the discarded scrap of note on the carpet, my spirit worn thin from expending so much power. Each time I strained to move objects, pieces of my own awareness felt like they frayed away. I could not keep wasting strength on attempts that the talisman barrier would only throw back. Downstairs, the clatter of plates and wooden furniture told me the dining room altar was fully rebuilt. The sticky rice had been laid out once more. The rooster's anxious clucks drifted up from the lower floor, and talismans hung ready along the table edges. Rhys was stuck in constant conversation with my parents. I could hear their voices rising and falling through the floor. Garrett and Elena pressed him to commit to the soul-shattering rite before sunset. They made it plain that if he hesitated any longer, the second exorcist would pull into the driveway within the hour. Rhys would lose the case entirely, and I would face annihilation at the hands of someone who would ask no questions at all. He tried one last time to reason with them. He told them that haunting was often grief made manifest, that destroying a soul was not a cure for old family wounds. His words only stoked their anger. To my parents, his compassion felt like betrayal. They had paid for a solution, not for moral reflection. They refused to entertain the possibility that they themselves carried part of the blame for everything that had gone wrong between me and them. Upstairs, I sank into heavy, aching memory. I replayed countless small moments of my lifetime. Birthdays where my wishes were brushed aside so Maeve could get what she wanted. Nights I cried alone in this very bedroom, too afraid to speak too loud and draw my parents' irritation. I had never hated. I had only grieved the love I never really got. Yet grief had twisted them so thoroughly that they could only interpret my lingering presence as vengeful. A soft knock landed against my bedroom. Maeve. She did not speak for a long, simply stood on the other. I could hear her quiet snap. "I keep thinking about the summer you turned 20, she said at last, voice barely a breath. "You locked yourself in here for 3 days after Mom and Dad forgot your way. I knew how hurt you were. Nothing. I just let them pretend it never." Her confession hung in the air. It was another piece of the truth, spoke loud, but trapped on the wrong side of the wood and magic. No one else was there to hear it, only me. Her guilt would not translate action. She could not bring herself to tear down the talismans, could not bring herself to confront. She could only carry the weight of her own regret. Footsteps thundered. Elena had come looking at her. "Maeve, get away at the door," my mother ordered sharply. "You do not want to invite its influence." Flinched. I heard her retreat, and the sound of her bedroom door clicking shut first. Once more, the moment for away. Rhys climbed the stairs later. He did not approach my door openly, knowing my parents were watching from the bottom landing. Instead, he lingered in the bathroom, out of their direct line of sight, and spoke toward my wall. "They are sending for the other man. He will arrive before dusk. I have run out of ways to delay them. I cannot physically break this barrier I'm seeing, and they will call the new exorcist immediately, if I." Despair washed over my ghostly form. My only ally was running out of leverage. I was trapped inside this room, drained, locked away with my journal and all my unspoken pain. Outside these walls, the family closed ranks. Maeve knew the truth but would not act. Rhys could only do so much without forfeiting what little influence he still held. There was no one left who would stand for me. All of my external support away. Sunlight began to bleed orange panes. It was drawing near. Where far down the road, a car was already toward this house, carrying a man who would happily shatter my soul without pause or question. I pressed myself against the talisman-covered door, and I could feel the cold, unyielding hum of its back. Time was almost gone. The weight of the talismans hummed against every inch of my bedroom door. I circled the nightstand where my journal rested, my ghostly fingers passing straight through the leather cover again and again. Frustration burned cold inside me. The answers were written across those pages, yet I could not move the book past the invisible barrier holding me captive. Downstairs, the sound of furniture being dragged signaled the altar was being reassembled in the dining room. The ritual was drawing near. I could hear fragments of conversation drifting up through the floorboards. Rhys had asked to look through boxes of my old belongings stored in the basement. Garrett and Elena had agreed, but they hovered over his shoulder the entire time, screening every item before it fell into his hands. Letters, old school notes, photo albums, anything that might paint a softer, truer version of who I had been was swiftly tucked away out of sight. They handed him only the artifacts that fit their narrative. Crumpled notes where I had written in loneliness, snapshots where my expression looked grim and withdrawn. They framed those pieces as proof of my festering resentment. Rhys was not fooled. He noticed how quickly they hid things away. Still, without unfiltered access to my thing, he could not build a solid case against their version of events. He had suspicion, but suspicion alone would not stop the rite of soul shattering. Mid-morning brought a sharp, unexpected twist. A phone rang somewhere in the kitchen. I heard Elena answer, her tone shifting from tight anxiety to icy alarm. When she hung up, she spoke rapidly to Garrett, unaware that the walls carried every word upward to. That was another spiritual practitioner. The one we reached out to is backup. He says he can arrive by sunset. If Rhys refuses to carry out what we have paid for, we will hire him. My whole being flared with cold dread. It was no longer merely. My parents had a replacement waiting in the wings. This second man held no reservations about obliterating soul. If Rhys continued to fall, they would cast him aside and bring in someone who would perform the destruction without hesitation or moral defeat. Time was no longer measured until sunset. My deadline had shrunk down to. Sometime later, Maeve slipped up. She lingered outside my talisman seat. I drifted close to the wood, hopeful despite my earlier distance. I could hear her quiet, shaky breathing on the other side. For a long moment she sang. Only I remember how they do. She whispered so softly I almost missed it through the door. I saw it hurt you, but I cannot go against them. If I speak out, the whole family falls apart. I am Liora. I am sorry. Tears sound her voice, yet she did not reach for the talismans. She did not come down. She offered only remorse, and then she turned away. No rescue, rebellion, only grief and surrender. Her apology settled over like frost. Sympathy would not. Shortly afterward, Rhys climbed alone. My parents were downstairs, busy resetting the ritual space. They trusted the talismans to hold me confined, so they did not follow. He stopped before my door and his voice was, I heard about your backup exorcist. They will bring him here at dusk. My window to stop this is closing fast. I need something tangible, something they cannot dismiss trickery. An idea flickered inside scattered spirit. The journal itself could not cross the threshold, but loose scraps could. Tucked inside the back cover of my diary were several notes. I had written them lowest moments. Short, raw fragments of my loneliness. About how badly I had wanted love. They were thin, light slips of paper. Maybe, just maybe, my limited power could. I floated over to the nightstand. I focused every ounce of my fading spiritual strength onto the journal. The air in the room dropped in temperature. The book shook violently on the wooden surface. One narrow scrap of handwriting tore loose pages. It fluttered upward, caught in the cold I had summoned. It drifted across the bedroom toward the door. It brushed against the talisman barrier. The paper shuddered, caught between my push and the mat holding the room closed. For a heartbeat it suspended in midair. Then the charms threw it backward. The scrap spiraled down and landed on the bedroom carpet. Rhys had witnessed the brief flutter through beneath the door. Something had happened in here, but he never received the note. He exhaled heavily. Downstairs, my father called his name, demanding he return to the dining room. Rhys had no longer at my door. I will keep fighting for as long as I can, he murmured, before his foot down the stairwell. I hovered above the useless scrap of paper on the floor. Sunset drew every passing minute. Backup exorcist was on call, and my bet at sending proof had failed. Hope frayed thin. The darkest stretch of my ordeal was only just beginning. Orange sunset light flooded through my bedroom window, painting long, burnt gold streaks across the floor. Panic did not burn hot anymore. It settled heavy and cold inside me, a quiet, hollow dread. Every attempt I had made to reach the outside world had failed. My power was fading fast. Even making the curtains flutter now cost me noticeable fragments of my ghostly awareness. If I wasted more strength on useless struggles, there might be nothing left of me even before the new exorcist laid a hand on the ritual altar. Yet I refused to dissolve into surrender. If outside help would not come, I would have to work with what I still held inside this sealed room. My gaze drifted back toward the leather journal resting on the nightstand. The paper scraps inside could not pass through the talisman barrier, but the barrier only blocked physical objects. Sound traveled through walls. Vibration traveled through wood. I began to search the room, drifting from shelf to shelf. My old record player sat in the corner, collecting dust. Stacked beside it were several vinyl records, and on the bottom shelf sat a cheap vintage tape recorder I had owned in my 20s. I had used it once to record personal thoughts when writing felt too heavy. A single old cassette tape still slotted inside its casing. Most of its surface was blank, but I remember. One night, overwhelmed by loneliness, I had spoken aloud every hurt I could not bring myself to write down, every quiet plea for my family to simply see. I had never shown it to anyone. I had hidden it away and forgotten it existed. Hope flickered back to life, faint, but I could not push paper notes under the door, but I might be able to operate that old machine. If I could hit play, the voice recorded on that tape would spill out as sound. Sound did not care about spirit-warding talismans. It would travel through plaster wood, drift out into the hallway, and anyone nearby would hear my. I drifted over to the tape. My incorporeal hands passed through its plastic casing again and again. I had to focus. drawing together every last reserve of my fraying spiritual energy. The air in the whole room plummeted in temperature. My form trembled, and I felt pieces of my memory slipping, small fragments of who I was fraying away with every second. The machine rattled. The play button dipped down with a click. Static crackled out of its tiny built-in. For a heartbeat, nothing but white noise filled. Then my own voice, young and raw and long dead, spilled into the... I wish they would notice how lonely I am. I wish Mom and Dad would stop putting Maeve's needs above everything else. I am not angry. I am just tired of feeling invisible in my... My voice flowed out, soft and shaky. It drifted through the closed bedroom door, seeping past the humming talismans, moving out into the upstairs hallway. Downstairs, voices cut off sentence. Rhys first. I caught the sharp pause in his conversation. They've heard it too. I could hear her gasp from down the hall. My parents reacted with immediate terrified outrage. It is taunting us, I cried out. It is using trickery to manipulate minds. They shouted over my recorded voice, to drown it out, insisting the sound was malicious. He said nothing. He did not shout. He did not wear a talisman. He listened. He walked slowly toward the stairs, climbing upward, following the sound of my decades-old. The cat rolled onward, spilling more of my house. I spoke about birthdays, about being rough when I cried, about how much I still loved my family. I think of vengeance, nothing of rage, pain and longing. My parents hurried up behind Rhys, yelling for him to stop listening, demanding ears. But Rhys came up the steps. He was halfway to my bedroom door when tires crunched loudly on the ground out front. Headlights sliced the front windows. The exorcist had arrived. The crunch of gravel faded. Heavy footsteps sounded on the front porch. A sharp knock boomed against the front door. The recorded voice from my old tape recorder continued to spill through the upstairs hallway, soft and unguarded, refusing to be silenced. Garrett stormed down the stairs to answer the door. His movements were urgent, desperate. The new exorcist had come. His name was Cale Rayner. He carried a hard leather satchel slung over one shoulder, his features cold and unyielding. He did not glance around the house with quiet curiosity the way Rhys had. He scanned the space with the single-minded focus of a man who had come to complete a job. Elena hurried down to meet him, eager to lay out her version of the haunting. Before she could speak at length, Rhys descended the stairs. He planted himself between Cale and the dining room altar, blocking his path. Before you perform any rite, you need to hear what is playing upstairs, Rhys said firmly. That is the voice of Liora Voss. It is not threat. It is grief. Listen for yourself. Kyle's eyes flicked upward toward the second floor, where my quiet taped confession still drifted through the walls. He gave a short, dismissive scoff. Ghosts craft illusions. They twist sound to plant lies inside living minds. I have seen this trick countless times. Do not let it fool you. He turned toward Garrett and Elena. Give me your confirmation, and I will shatter this spirit before night. No delays, no questioning. Tension coiled tight inside every corner of the house. I hovered near the top of the stairwell, still trapped behind the talisman, my recorded voice still spilling out behind. The tape was drawing toward end. Soon the speaker would fall silent, and my one chance to lay bare the truth would... Elena. She had heard She had heard the raw loneliness in... For a few seconds her resolve wavered, but old fear fought it out. She had spent months convincing herself I was a vengeful. Unlearning that story would mean confronting how badly they had failed me while I was alive. Guilt threatened to Garrett's. We hired to destroy it. Start now. A small, trembling voice cut through the room. Maeve stepped out from the shadow of the hallway. She had stayed hidden the whole time, shrinking away. Now hands shook, but she would not be quiet. A trick, she whispered. Everything on that is true. We treated Liora badly. We overlooked her pain, over and over. That is what happy. Not evil. Every head in the room snapped toward her. Shock rippled across my faces. Elena's. Maeve, your tongue. Garrett warned, sharp. No. Maeve lifted her chin. Tears streamed down her cheeks. I of pretending. I watched them birthdays. I watched them wash off her pain. We made her miserable when she was alive, and now we want to erase her soul so we do not have to it. The word hung heavy in the air. The family's carefully constructed narrative crashed completely apart. Cale grew impatient, shifting his weight, reaching for items in their satchel. He cared nothing only secrets. He only waited for the destruction. He seized the moment. He turned to Garrett and Elena, his tone sparing. You wanted an exorcism for a vengeful ghost. What you have is the ghost of a daughter who carried years of unhealed hurt. Destroying her will not erase your guilt. It will only destroy the last piece of her in this world. Confusion and agony played across my parents' faces. He was crumbling. Wait forever. He told them he would give them 60 seconds for final choice. Either author the soul-shattering rite, or out the door. Upstairs, the recorder's voice stuttered. Cassette reached its end. Static hissed from the speaker and fell silent. My recorded testimony was over. All that remained hung on whether my parents could bring themselves to Maeve had laid bare. 60 seconds hung heavy over the Voss house. Cale Reiner stood with his satchel open, fingers resting on bone-handled ritual tools designed to tear a spirit apart. His gaze bored into Garrett and Elena, counting down the seconds in unspoken silence. Rhys stood opposite him, ready to push back against the rite if the order was given. Maeve stood trembling beside the wall, her fight spent, waiting to see whether her confession would change anything. I hovered trapped upstairs behind the talisman barrier. No tape, no voice, no more tricks left to deploy. Every drop of my spiritual strength had been burned away. I could not rattle a doorknob, could not stir a breeze. I could only listen, helpless, as my mother and father wrestled with the truth Maeve had laid before them. Garrett's jaw was locked. Years of stubborn pride warred with the words his younger daughter had spoken. He wanted to cling to the story that cast me as a monster. If I was a vengeful ghost, then their failures as parents felt smaller. To admit they had hurt me was to carry a weight they had spent months running from. We have suffered, he ground out. We have lost sleep. We have lived in fear. Suffering does not mean you get to erase, Rhys answered quietly. Your pain is real, but so was hers. Destroying her soul will not make your guilt disappear. It will only bury it where you never have to look at it. Elena crumbled. She sank onto the bottom stair, shoulders shaking with raw, ugly sorrow. All the rage and fear melted away, revealing the grief underneath. She was not fighting it. She was confronting the memory of her owner, the girl she had loved, and images must have flashed through her. My childhood births. Quiet, the days before grief had twisted everything. I thought she hated, she whispered. I told myself that over and over so I could it. Cale checked his. Time is near on. Give me your. Garrett glanced down at his wee wife, then toward Maeve, whose eyes glistened with desperate hope. The hard edge in his posture softened, little by little. The imagined monster of their making was dissolving. He was finally seeing the daughter they lost, not the phantom they had. He exhaled a long Withdraw the quest, he said last. We will not shatter soul. Shock rippled him. Cale's expression cold. He snapped his. You waste my time, sharply. Do not call. Without another word, he turned and walked her. Car doors slammed, his engine roared, and tires bit into gravel as he drove away to the dark. The threat of violent annihilation was gone, but the danger was not lifted. The paper talisman still hummed across my bedroom door. I remained trapped in the room. Relief mixed with sorrow. I was not destroyed, yet I was still bound to this house, unseen, still caught between memories. Rhys turned. The spirit is not to get revenge. She is stuck here, bound by unresolved pain. If you want her to find peace, you do not fight her. You acknowledge her. He nodded slowly. He walked toward the stairs, Elena rising to follow him. Maeve went ahead, pulling the thumbtacks free one by one. Talisman after talisman fell from my doorframe, fluttered to the floor. The invisible hum faded. It was broken. The bedroom door swung open. For the first time the story began. My family stepped into my room. They looked over my books, my hood draped across the bed, the journal stand. They saw the scraps of notes scattered across my carpet. A cold-blooded monster. Only the quiet traces of a young who had been lonely. Elena reached out, her hand passing strangely form. She flinched at this hollow sensation. She could not touch me, could not hold me. In her face. So sorry, Liora, she whispered. We failed you. We were so busy fearing a ghost. We forgot her. Garrett stood beside, throat tight, unable to speak through his grief. Maeve to stand near the nightstand, picking up the torn paper scrap I had won the barrier. Peace was not instant. Resentment lingered inside me. Old wounds could not vanish in one moment of apology, but the threat of erasure was over. I was no longer marked for destruction. I had a choice. I could linger here, anger and old hurts, or I could let the past soften and move on. Moonlight spilled through my bedroom window, washing over the shelves and worn furniture that had held so many of my quiet sorrows. The talismans lay crumpled on the floor, their magic spent. I drifted freely through the room at last, no invisible wall throwing me backward. The threat of annihilation was gone, yet I still felt the heavy weight of decades-old hurt coiled deep within my ghost form. For so long, survival had been my only goal. Now that I would not be destroyed, I had to decide what I wanted for myself. My parents stood in the middle of the room, quiet and broken. Elena's gaze traveled over my nightstand, landing on the leather-bound journal. She reached out and drew it toward her fingers brushing the worn leather cover. She hesitated before opening it, as if she feared what she would read inside. Garrett stood beside her, his shoulders hunched, while Maeve lingered near the foot of my bed. They began to read my journal together, page by page. Silence stretched long between them as they turned each sheet. They read about forgotten birthdays, about nights I cried myself to sleep, about how badly I had craved simply being seen. Soft, stifled weeping filled the small bedroom. This was no imaginary vengeful spirit. This was their daughter, written plainly in ink. There was no monster, only a girl who had carried loneliness in silence. Rhys lingered in the doorway, not intruding on this private moment. He kept his distance, allowing the family to sit with all they had refused to face before. I drifted close beside them watching. Some small, bitter part of me wanted to hold on to every old injury. I wanted them to carry that pain forever, to feel every ounce of the loneliness I had endured. But I also saw genuine remorse in their tear-streaked faces. They could never give me back my life. They could never go back and rewrite all the years they had overlooked me. But they could finally understand. Later that night, the family filed out of my... They took the journal downstairs, intending to read through the rest of it. They would not lock this room away more. They would leave my things untouched, a memorial to the me, not the angry ghost they had invented in... Rhys found me drifting in the empty room, where the ritual altar still sat. The caged rooster had been collected by a low farmer, and most of the sticky rice. Only crumpled leftover talismans remained scattered across the wooden... You do not have to stay tied to this house, he softly. His voice meant only for me. Unfinished grief angered you here. Now that the truth has come to light, that chain is broken. You move on. I thought about what moving on meant. It would mean leaving behind every memory, both the painful ones and the few gentle, happy moments I still cherished. It would mean letting go of the longing for the love I had never received while alive. To linger would mean staying close to them, watching them live lives, trapped in the loop of old wounds forever. Neither choice felt easy. There was no perfect happy ending. I floated back upstairs one final time. I passed Maeve's bedroom. Through the closed door, I heard her speak in a quiet, full prayer, apologizing to me one more time. I drifted past my parents' room, where they talked low voices, promising each other they would carry me. They would not rewrite. I returned to the old bedroom. Moonlight pooled across the bed where I had spent so many lonely nights. I thought of every entry inside that journal, every quiet wish, every moment where I had hoped for something more. I did not need to make them suffer. Their guilt would stay with them enough. I did not need vengeance, needed rest. A soft, warm light began to gather around my incorporeal form. It was not fire, not destruction. It was release. All the cold tension that had bound me to these walls melted away. I looked back one last time at that had shaped me, hurt me, finally understood me. I held on to the fragments of memory and let the sharp... Downstairs, shift in the air, departing. The next morning, Rhys packed his satchel lost property. He would want to take more cases, and he would take this story with him, a reminder that many hauntings were only family pain, mostly shape. Lived on. I kept my bedroom intact. They read my journal often. They spoke of me, not a phantom of rage, but as the daughter and sister I truly had been. Grief never fully faded. The harm they'd done could never be undone, but I learned to live with their regret, and to read truthfully. There was no miracle fix, no reversal of death, but there was closure. I was gone from the old house at last, not shattered, not erased, finally free.